I want you to picture something. Like, really put yourself in this exact scenario for a second.
Okay, I'm ready.
You are standing on the roof of a high-rise building right in the middle of San Francisco.
Nice.
Yeah, it's this beautiful, completely serene California afternoon. The sun is shining. It's catching the glass of all the surrounding skyscrapers. And right in front of you is a crystal-clear rooftop pool.
It sounds incredibly relaxing.
Right. The water is perfectly still. It's like reflecting the sky like a sheet of mirror glass. It is the absolute picture of luxury and calm. You're holding a drink, maybe feeling the warmth on your shoulders, just taking it in.
Okay.
But then, almost imperceptibly at first, you feel a vibration, just in the soles of your feet.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, and before you can even process what that vibration means, you look over at the pool, and the water is suddenly frothing.
Oh, wow.
It is bubbling up furiously, like some giant invisible hand just cranked the jacuzzi up to its maximum setting. And then the entire building beneath you shivers.
Shivers. That's a terrifying word for a building.
It doesn't just shake. It literally shivers, like a living creature that's just been struck by a freezing wind. And in the very next heartbeat, that massive structure of steel and concrete begins to completely collapse.
It is such a mesmerizing image you just painted there.
Now, the good news is that shivering building isn't real yet. It's the visceral, incredibly terrifying hook of the 2015 blockbuster film San Andreas.
Right. And it gets right to the core of why this genre even exists. You know, that sudden, super violent transition from absolute mundane tranquility to just unfathomable chaos.
Exactly. But today, we aren't just sitting back, eating popcorn, and cheering at the CGI destruction. Welcome to the Deep Dive, where our mission is to basically tear out this film's foundation. We want to figure out why humans are so utterly obsessed with watching the world end.
Which is such a great topic. Taking a crowbar to the foundation of this specific movie, it offers an incredible window into how modern Hollywood engineers spectacle.
It really does.
Yeah.
We want to understand the mechanics of this disaster. Like, why did audiences all over the globe, across entirely different cultures and languages, flock to see this specific vision of destruction?
Yeah, the global appeal is huge here.
And honestly, my favorite part of this whole deep dive, we're going to look at where the actual geology and the science completely spectacularly break down.
Oh, they definitely do.
Big time. And we have a fantastic stack of materials to help us pull this all apart today.
We really do. What's on the docket?
So we've got the comprehensive Wikipedia documentation, which details all the film's production and release history. We're also bringing in a highly entertaining, very colorful YouTube review by critic Jeremy Johns, just to capture that raw theater-going experience.
He's always good for that energy.
Totally. And we're contrasting that with a much sharper, more analytical critique from Peter Bradshaw over at The Guardian. Then we're bringing in the heavy hitters of reality with a pretty brutal scientific reality check from the American Geosciences Institute's Earth magazine.
Oh, the scientists did not hold back.
They really didn't.
Mm.
And finally, we're sprinkling in some direct reviews from IMDb fans who view this film through a very specific, very unapologetic lens.
You know, what's fascinating here is how compiling all these sources really reveals San Andreas as the perfect case study. It's a case study for a very specific type of global entertainment.
That was so.
Well, if you look at the landscape of modern blockbusters, especially, you know, over the last decade or so, they are almost entirely tied to massive, sprawling cinematic universes.
Right, where you have to do homework before you go to the theater.
Exactly. You need to have seen 10 prior movies just to understand why the villain is angry. Or, conversely, the movies are rooted in very contemporary, heavy anxieties.
Like what?
Like climate change or complex geopolitical thrillers. But this movie, it represents a vision of near-term apocalypse that is entirely deliberately disconnected from climate change. There are no giant radioactive monsters, no complex alien invaders.
It's literally just rocks moving.
It is just the Earth itself violently rebelling. And in a strange way, that makes it a unique, almost nostalgic piece of entertainment.
Wait, hold on. Nostalgic apocalypse is a wild phrase.
I know, it sounds like an oxymoron.
It really does.
Yeah.
You're saying we have nostalgia for a time when the world was just naturally trying to kill us rather than us slowly killing it with, like, carbon emissions.
Precisely. Think about the psychological burden of a climate change disaster movie.
Okay.
When you watch a movie where the ice caps melt and flood New York because of pollution, there is an inherent guilt placed on the viewer. The movie is essentially pointing a finger right at the audience and saying, you caused this.
Oh, yeah. It's like being scolded while you're trying to eat your popcorn.
Exactly. But a tectonic plate shifting, that completely absolves the audience. It's an act of God. It's an act of nature. It allows you to sit there and enjoy the terrifying spectacle of a collapsing city without any of the associated guilt of being complicit in the disaster.
That is a deeply comforting thought hidden inside a nightmare.
Mm.
Like pure, unadulterated survival fantasy without the lecture.
Yes. It taps into a primal fear without asking you to take a political stance.
Wow. Okay, but before we get completely lost in the psychology of guilt-free destruction, we really need to look at the literal blueprint of this movie.
Let's do it.
Because how do you construct a $110 million guilt-free apocalypse in 2015? The strategy they used here is drastically different from how they used to do this stuff.
It's a completely different playbook.
Right. So we are looking at a film directed by Brad Peyton. It was written by Carlton Cuse, who, cut his teeth engineering massive mysteries on the TV show Lost.
He definitely knows how to build a mystery box.
Yeah. And they made a very specific, very calculated choice regarding who actually occupies this crumbling world.
The casting strategy is absolutely the foundational bedrock of San Andreas. And to understand why it works so well, you have to contrast it with the golden age of the disaster film.
The 70s.
Right. Peter Bradshaw's review in The Guardian makes a brilliant point about this evolution. He notes that back in the 1970s, think of the 1974 classic Earthquake starring Charlton Heston, or The Towering Inferno.
Oh, I know exactly what you mean. The studios relied almost entirely on the all-star ensemble cast.
Yes, the massive ensemble.
It was a complete parade of famous faces. You'd buy a ticket, and it was just a constant barrage of pointing at the screen like, look, there is Gene Hackman. Wait, is that a Fred Astaire? Oh my God, Paul Newman is on fire.
It was very distracting in a way.
Why did they do that? Was it just studio flexing? Like, look how many actors we can afford.
It was actually a very deliberate psychological tactic. The studios knew that a massive impersonal disaster like a burning building or a sinking ship can actually be quite alienating to look at for 2 hours.
Because it's just like infrastructure failing.
Right. So they packed the roster with highly recognizable, beloved faces to provide a solemn sense of epic scale and also to give a continuous firework display of cameo recognition.
So you're engaged because you recognize the people.
The idea was that if you have 10 huge stars, the audience will care about the destruction because they subconsciously map their affection for those actors onto the characters in peril.
That makes total sense. You aren't just watching a boat flip over. You're watching Gene Hackman try to survive a flipped boat.
Exactly. The star power grounds the spectacle.
But San Andreas throws that entire playbook right out the window. There's no ensemble here. They bypass the cameo parade completely.
They really do.
Instead, they invest practically the entire emotional weight of the film into a single massive star, and they let the computer-generated imagery do the rest of the heavy lifting. And that single star is Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson.
Playing Ray Gaines, right?
Yes, Ray Gaines. He's a chief rescue helicopter pilot for the Los Angeles Fire Department.
And this is where the modern VFX landscape really changes the casting calculus.
How so?
Well, in 1974, the special effects, while groundbreaking for the time, were still pretty limited. You needed the actors to convey the terror because the shaking sets could only do so much to convince you.
Shaking the camera can only get you so far.
Right. But by 2015, the CGI is capable of rendering the complete photorealistic collapse of the Golden Gate Bridge. The spectacle itself is the ensemble cast. So you don't need 10 movie stars to hold the audience's attention.
You just need one anchor.
You just need one anchor.
And what an anchor he is. Okay, let's unpack this. Because Jeremy Jans, in his YouTube review, had this theory that I haven't been able to stop thinking about since I heard it.
Let's hear it.
He jokes that every time Dwayne Johnson flexes his massive biceps in this movie, the fault line just reacts to it.
Like the Earth is intimidated?
Literally. Like the tectonic plates are intimidated by his sheer physical presence. Johns points out that Johnson is essentially a human shock absorber.
That's a great phrase.
It is. In a movie with a $110 million budget where gravity essentially ceases to exist, Johnson's sheer physical mass and his unshakable charisma are the only things heavy enough to keep the movie from just floating away into pure, chaotic video game noise.
Human shock absorber is a perfect encapsulation of his cinematic function here. Let's really dig into why that specific persona is necessary for a modern blockbuster.
Yeah, please do.
In a narrative where the very ground beneath your feet, which is the ultimate symbol of stability in our lives, is betraying you, the human brain desperately seeks a new focal point of stability.
Because everything else is falling apart.
Exactly. And Dwayne Johnson's entire brand is built on rugged, invincible capability. He has broad shoulders, an unshakable calm, and just a visible physical power. He provides a psychological safety net for the viewer.
Oh, I see.
You watch San Francisco undulating like a liquid, but you subconsciously know that as long as Ray Gaines is flying that helicopter, there is some semblance of order in the universe.
But wait, if he's that invincible, doesn't it drain the tension? Like, if I know the rock is going to survive, because of course he is, why do I care about the earthquake?
That is the exact problem the screenwriters had to solve. You can't just have him fighting rocks. And it brings us to the supporting cast, and specifically the necessity of the human antagonist.
Because you can't punch a fault line.
Exactly. Ray can't do it alone, and he needs someone to contrast against. So we have Carla Gugino playing Emma, who is Ray's estranged wife. We have Alexandra Daddario playing their capable daughter, Blake. And crucially, we have Ione Gruffud playing Daniel.
Hi, Daniel.
Daniel is Emma's new boyfriend. He is a wealthy, successful civil engineer who owns a pampered private jet and basically oversees the construction of massive, glossy skyscrapers in San Francisco.
Ah, yes. The incredibly wealthy, incredibly detestable new boyfriend trope. I feel like this guy was designed in a lab specifically for the audience to hate him.
He absolutely was, and Bradshaw points this out perfectly in his critique. The film is engineered around macro-level, impersonal destruction. But impersonal destruction gets numbing after a while.
Like you said, it's just infrastructure failing.
Right. The writers understand that a collapsing skyscraper doesn't have a face, it doesn't have a motivation, you can't hate it. You need a micro-level emotional rooting interest to keep the audience engaged.
And Daniel is that rooting interest. Or rooting against interest.
Exactly. Daniel's pampered private jet and his soft wealth are meant to stand in stark, immediate contrast to the manly, rugged dependability of Ray's public service rescue helicopter.
So it's essentially class warfare disguised as a disaster movie. Like the rugged blue-collar public servant versus the soft, cowardly billionaire.
In many ways, yeah, it really is. The film sets up this dynamic so that the audience has someone specific to root against. Because when the earthquake hits, Daniel is tested. He is presented with a choice, and he commits an act of utter, irredeemable cowardice.
Oh, right, when they're in the parking garage.
Yes. He abandons Blake Ray's daughter and a crushed car in a collapsing parking garage just to save his own skin. This action validates Ray as the true patriarch and hero. It gives the audience a deeply satisfying, entirely personal emotional arc to follow amidst all the rubble.
It is brilliant narrative manipulation when you think about it. Yeah. You're sitting there watching California literally break off into the ocean. Millions of lives are actively being ruined. But what you are actually intensely cheering for is for the nice guy rescue pilot to get his wife back from the cowardly jerk.
It scales down the apocalypse to a family dispute.
Yeah. The earthquake is just an incredibly expensive marriage counselor for Ray and Emma.
That is a hilarious way to put it, but it's completely accurate. The disaster is just the catalyst for the restoration of the nuclear family. Now, with those pieces on the board, our human shock absorber, the estranged family, the cowardly billionaire, and the massive budget, we have to look at the actual deployment of the destruction.
Because you can't just blow it all up in minute one.
No, you have to pace it. How does a movie like this deploy its chaos?
Which is a great question, because I actually had a huge issue with the pacing here, and I know a lot of critics did too. The movie attempts to build this rising staircase of chaos. Let's trace how they escalate the plot, because it doesn't just start with San Francisco falling down.
No, it starts much further inland.
Right, it actually starts out in Nevada, at the Hoover Dam. We meet Dr. Lawrence Hayes, a Caltech seismologist played by Paul Giamatti.
A staple of the genre, the scientist who knows the truth.
Exactly. And his colleague, Dr. Kim Park, played by Will Yen Lee, they are at the dam testing a brand new, highly experimental earthquake prediction model. And almost immediately, their model proves correct.
Very convenient timing.
Extremely. A previously unknown fault ruptures, triggering a magnitude 7.1 earthquake. The dam collapses in this spectacularly violent sequence, and Dr. Park sacrifices himself to save a young girl, getting swept away by the massive wall of water.
Now, from a structural standpoint, this Hoover Dam sequence is incredibly effective. It serves multiple purposes simultaneously.
Really? Like what?
Well, first, it acts as the inciting incident, proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that Dr. Hayes' prediction model works. That sets the stakes for the rest of the film. We know the scientist is right.
Okay, that makes sense.
But more importantly, it provides an initial, contained spectacle. It's an isolated environment out in Nevada. It hooks the audience with a massive display of CGI water and crumbling concrete before the movie moves into the densely populated major cities. It is the appetizer.
Ah, the appetizer. And they do not wait long for the main course.
Not at all.
The destruction aggressively moves up the California fault line. Next, a magnitude 9.1 earthquake devastates Los Angeles. And this sequence is insane.
This is where Ray really gets to work.
Yeah, this is where Ray is in his absolute element, flying his rescue helicopter through a literal canyon of collapsing, exploding skyscrapers to rescue Emma right off the roof of a building that is actively crumbling beneath her feet.
The visual of the Los Angeles basin undulating like a liquid ocean is visually stunning.
It really is. But the movie keeps pushing north. The fault line unzips further, and we finally hit San Francisco, which suffers a record-breaking magnitude 9.6 quake. The huge one. And this is where our subplot really takes over. Blake, the daughter, is trapped in the ruined city after Daniel abandons her. She ends up being rescued by two British brothers who were seeking employment at Daniel's architectural firm.
Ben and Ollie.
Right. Ben, played by Hugo Johnstone Burt, and his younger brother, Ollie.
And as an aside, one highly observant IMDb reviewer happily pointed out that Ollie is played by Art Parkinson, who fantasy fans will immediately recognize as the constantly disappearing Rickon Stark from Game of Thrones.
Oh, that's hilarious.
It's one of those fun, metatextual details that audiences love to latch onto during the quieter moments of a film.
I love that IMDb fans are just sitting there pointing at the screen going, hey, it's the Stark kid, while San Francisco burns to the ground. So Blake, Ben, and Ollie are navigating this completely ruined city, trying to find high ground to signal Ray and Emma, who are currently flying toward them. Now, on paper, this sounds like a relentless white-knuckle thrill ride. But this is where the movie grinds its gears for me. Jeremy Jahns diagnosed the film with a condition he perfectly titled disaster movie-itis.
Disaster movie-itis. Okay, I like that.
He asks a question that I completely agree with. Why do filmmakers insist on inserting incredibly slow, highly dramatic, clunky downtime right in the middle of the apocalypse?
Give me an example of the downtime that bothered you.
Okay, so Ray and Emma are flying in a stolen vehicle toward San Francisco. Entire cities are literally burning below them. The casualty rate has to be in the millions at this point.
It's catastrophic, yeah.
And the script decides this is the absolute perfect time for them to have a slow, melancholic, whispered conversation about their divorce papers.
Oh, right.
And not just that, they start talking about the lingering trauma of their deceased daughter, Mallory, who drowned in a rafting accident years ago. It halts the momentum completely. It feels so jarring. Why do they do this? Can't they just keep the tension high?
Well, it feels jarring because the dialogue is poorly executed, but the mechanical necessity of that scene is actually rooted in human biology.
Wait, biology? How?
Filmmakers who work on this massive scale are terrified of something called sensory fatigue. The human brain simply cannot process 120 minutes of uninterrupted, high-decibel, high-visual complexity destruction without eventually flatlining its emotional response.
So you just get numb to the explosions.
If you just show collapsing buildings for 2 straight hours, the audience's adrenal system burns out, the spectacle becomes normal, and the absolute worst thing a $110 million movie can be is normal.
So they intentionally bore you so that the next explosion feels bigger.
Essentially, yes. If we connect this to the bigger picture, you need what Jahns refers to as downswings. You need valleys to make the peaks feel higher.
Okay, I see the logic.
The quiet moments, even if they are clunky conversations about divorce papers, are designed to drop the audience's heart rate. They allow you to catch your breath. The intent is that you invest just enough in the character's grief so that when the next building falls, you actually care whether they survive.
I get the theory, but man, the execution here is just so cheesy. The dialogue doesn't support the weight of the valley.
That is the core issue. The structural theory of pacing is sound, but Jahns is absolutely right that the execution is flawed. The filmmakers know exactly how to render a photorealistic collapsing bridge, but they struggle to write compelling, authentic human grief.
Yeah, it feels very paint by numbers.
When the dialogue relies on formulaic tropes, those necessary downswings just feel like you are waiting in line at an amusement park. You're just staring at the back of someone's head, waiting to get back on the ride.
Which actually brings up a brilliant defense of the film from that same community of IMDb reviewers.
Oh, what did they say?
One user argued that criticizing the dialogue in San Andreas is fundamentally misunderstanding what the movie actually is. They argued, You have to view it entirely as a theme park ride.
A theme park ride. I like that framing.
Think about it. When you get on a massive roller coaster, you don't expect a profound, emotionally nuanced backstory about why the cart you were sitting in is painted red. You don't care about the cart's trauma, you just want the next massive drop.
That's very true.
The cheesy dialogue and the clunky exposition in this movie are just the mechanical click, click, click of the chain pulling you slowly up the hill.
Yeah.
You endure it because you know gravity is about to take over again.
That is an incredibly fair and accurate assessment of how the general audience consumes this specific genre. You aren't buying a ticket for Shakespearean tragedy, you're buying a ticket for the drop.
Exactly.
And since the character drama deliberately takes a backseat to the ride itself, we have to talk about the drop. We need to analyze the true star of this film, the visual effects budget, and the absolute physics-defying absurdity of the survival tactics.
Oh, the survival tactics are pure comedy, if you actually think about the physics for more than 3 seconds.
We really are.
But first, the scale of the VFX. This was a massive, globally coordinated effort across several major studios. You had outfits like Hydrolex, Cinesite, Image Engine, and several others all working simultaneously to create this seamless nightmare.
It's a huge logistical undertaking.
They were tasked with rendering the destruction of some of the most recognizable landmarks on the entire planet in a way that felt tactile and realistic in its textures, but completely hyperbolic in its scale.
And that hyperbole reaches its absolute zenith in the film's climax. Let's break down the mechanics of the final act.
Let's do it.
The earthquakes have completely leveled the San Francisco Peninsula, but the massive tectonic shifting beneath the ocean has displaced an unimaginable volume of water. This displacement creates a colossal tsunami that is now rapidly approaching the San Francisco Bay.
Okay, and let's just quickly review the vehicular triathlon Ray and Emma have been on just to get to this point.
It's quite the list.
It's absurd. They started in a helicopter, which suffered a gearbox failure because of the dust. They auto-rotated and crash-landed in a shopping center. Then they stole a truck.
Right.
They drove that truck until the road literally split open into a chasm. So they traded the truck to an elderly couple for a small, fixed-wing airplane.
Naturally.
Naturally, they flew the airplane over the burning city until the engine died. They tandem parachuted out of the dead airplane, landing in AT&T Park. And now, finally, they have commandeered a small motorboat.
Just a standard Tuesday.
Exactly. They are sitting in this boat, looking out at the bay, and they see this colossal, hundreds of feet high wall of water approaching the Golden Gate Bridge.
The tsunami sequence is the crown jewel of the film's visual effects. It is designed to induce a feeling of total, inescapable dread.
Dread. I was laughing out loud at the video game logic of it, because here's where it entirely detaches from reality.
Here's where it gets really interesting, yeah.
Ray, our human shock absorber, looks at this tsunami, which again is the size of a skyscraper, and decides their best course of action is to simply drive the motorboat directly at it.
He's a man of action.
He punches the throttle, and they literally drive up the incredibly steep, almost vertical face of this massive wave, trying to crest it before it breaks. It is like they're trying to drive an ATV up a vertical wall.
The physics of a small boat propeller generating enough thrust to push that much weight up a near-vertical incline of rushing water is, to put it mildly, scientifically dubious.
Dubious is a very polite word. It's impossible. And while they are essentially rock climbing a wave in a boat, a massive, fully loaded cargo container ship has been caught in the swell and is barreling right toward them.
Just to add to the stress.
Right, they have to swerve to barely dodge the colossal twin propellers of this ship as they finally crest the wave.
And the film uses that exact container ship to brilliantly, if bluntly, tie up a loose narrative end.
Oh, this is the best part.
That massive ship is carried by the wave and crashes directly into the center span of the Golden Gate Bridge, snapping it in half. And who happens to be standing on that exact section of the bridge?
Daniel, the cowardly boyfriend.
Daniel. He is crushed beneath a falling shipping container in a moment of absolute, undeniable karmic retribution. The script delivers his punishment with the subtle grace of a falling anvil.
It is so satisfying, though. But the absurdity just keeps escalating. The wave crests the bridge and crashes into the ruined city, flooding the downtown streets. Blake, Ben, and Ollie are trapped inside a partially constructed, heavily damaged high-rise, a building, ironically, that Daniel's firm was constructing.
That's a nice poetic touch.
Yeah. The tsunami water rushes in, the building starts sinking into the liquefied ground and actively collapsing, and Blake gets trapped underwater behind some debris.
The tension is incredibly high here.
Ray, who has somehow navigated his tiny boat through a flooded metropolis full of submerged cars and debris, finds the building. He dives into the murky water, swims through a maze of sunken office furniture, pries Blake loose, and drags her up. But she is drowned.
Right.
So he begins performing CPR on her while they are still inside this sinking, groaning structure.
The tension in this scene is layered so heavily. You have the ticking clock of the sinking building, the medical ticking clock of the CPR, and the structural ticking clock of the collapsing walls.
And how do they escape this impossible death trap? Emma, who is still up in the boat, guns the engine and literally crashes the boat through the thick glass windows of the sinking building, providing an escape route for Ray to haul Blake aboard, where he finally manages to resuscitate her.
It's a lot to take in.
I was watching this thinking, they're essentially dodging raindrops in a hurricane. The sheer amount of luck required to survive any one of those things is astronomical.
It is a sequence of events so statistically improbable that it borders on the theological. And Jeremy Jahns had a wonderfully visceral reaction to this in his review.
What did he say about the wave?
He was talking about the characters surviving the initial impact of that massive wave cresting into the bay. He was completely incredulous at the film's casual attitude toward the concussive force of water. He said the movie's logic was just, oh, that's a really convenient wave of water. Just hold on, we'll get through it.
Just hold your breath.
Yeah, he admitted he was literally yelling at the screen, you guys should be dead, everyone should be dead.
And he is entirely correct. The concussive force alone would have crushed them, let alone the debris in the water. But why do we accept it? Why does a theater full of people cheer instead of rolling their eyes and walking out?
This is where Peter Bradshaw's insight from his Guardian review becomes essential. Bradshaw posits that the entire premise of the movie relies on a very specific, deeply ingrained psychological tightrope that the audience walks.
A tightrope.
Yes. The movie gets you into the theater based on a terrifying, very real premise. A massive earthquake could actually happen. That taps into genuine anxiety. But the audience's enjoyment, their ability to eat popcorn, laugh, and cheer for Ray, relies entirely on the unconscious, comforting conviction that if it did happen, it wouldn't happen like this.
Wait, elaborate on that. The unreality of it is actually a feature, not a bug.
Precisely. The CGI in San Andreas and the absurdity of the survival tactics acts as a protective psychological layer. It allows us to experience the sublime terror of nature's wrath, but it deliberately removes the messy, realistic, grim consequences of human frailty.
Oh, I see.
We know subconsciously that Ray and Emma driving a boat up a tsunami is a pure fantasy. But it is a necessary fantasy. Think about it. If the movie portrayed the actual realistic outcome of a magnitude 9.6 earthquake and a tsunami hitting a major metropolitan area, the true casualty numbers, the inescapable nature of the destruction, the crushing reality of the aftermath, it would not be a fun summer blockbuster.
No, it would be devastating.
It would be a grueling, traumatizing, documentary-style horror film. You wouldn't cheer, you'd leave the theater depressed. The absurdity of the physics is Hollywood telling the audience, do not worry, this is just a ride, you are safe.
That makes total sense. The physics-defying stunts are essentially a comforting hug from the director. It's a protective layer of pure Hollywood gloss.
Exactly.
But that transition from the Hollywood fantasy of survival leads us directly into a really important area of our deep dive, how actual, real-world scientists viewed this film.
The scientists had a lot to say.
Because if the movie is a fantasy acting as a protective layer, just how far off from reality is it? We know a boat can't climb a wave, but what about the actual geology? Does the ground actually behave like this?
Well, the film certainly makes a concerted attempt to wrap itself in a cloak of scientific authority, primarily through the character of Dr. Lawrence Hayes, the Caltech seismologist played by Paul Giamatti.
Right, the guy who figures out how to predict the earthquakes using magnetic pulse rates.
Right.
But of course, in true frustrating disaster movie fashion, he finalizes his prediction model just a few hours too late to actually evacuate millions of people.
It's always too late.
He's stuck in his lab at Caltech, watching the monitors as the entire state goes red. And this leads to what John's highlighted as the most wonderfully cheesy line in the entire film.
I know exactly the line you mean.
Giamatti is looking at his computer. The data is showing that the entire San Andreas fault is unzipping from Los Angeles to San Francisco.
Yeah.
A terrified reporter standing next to him asks who they need to call to warn them. Giamatti just slowly takes off his glasses, looks dead into the camera with absolute Shakespearean gravity, and whispers, "Everybody."
It is the quintessential disaster movie trailer moment. It is engineered in a lab to be highly quotable and completely dramatic.
It's so good.
But if you think about it for a single second, it is largely devoid of practical meaning. Who exactly is everybody? Which specific government agency do you dial? How do you initiate a mass broadcast to 30 million people? The logistics are completely ignored in favor of the emotional punch of the word.
It is pure, unadulterated cheese. But while the audience was laughing and eating popcorn during that line, the scientific community was watching this film, and they were literally pulling their hair out.
They were not amused.
We looked at a detailed critique from Earth Magazine, which is a publication by the American Geosciences Institute. And they did not mince words. They called the film, and I quote, "dreadful from a scientific perspective." They accused it of perpetuating dangerous geologic absurdities.
The frustration from the geosciences community is fascinating because it highlights the vast chasm between what makes cinematic stakes compelling and what actual real-world risk assessment looks like.
How so?
The entire film operates on the premise that the San Andreas Fault is the ultimate apocalyptic threat to the entire West Coast. The movie shows it splitting the Earth open into a massive, bottomless canyon that swallows cars and generating a tsunami that towers over the Golden Gate Bridge.
Okay, lay it on me. Why is that dreadful science? I thought San Andreas was the big one.
It is a massive fault, but the mechanics of how it moves make the movie's climax entirely fictional. The San Andreas is what geologists call a strike-slip fault.
Strike-slip.
Okay, this means that two massive tectonic plates, the Pacific Plate and the North American Plate, are sliding past each other horizontally.
Horizontally, so side by side like two cars rubbing paint on the highway.
Exactly. Imagine putting two heavy textbooks flat on a table, pressing their edges together, and sliding one forward and one backward. That immense friction builds up, and when it finally snaps and slips, the ground shakes violently. That is an earthquake.
Okay, I'm following.
But because the movement is lateral side to side, it does not create a gaping, bottomless chasm. The Earth doesn't pull apart to reveal the core. It just slides violently past itself.
Okay, so the giant canyon that swallows the truck in the movie is a myth. But what about the tsunami? If a massive magnitude 9.6 quake happens right on the coast, wouldn't that shake the ocean and create a giant wave?
No, and this is the biggest scientific grievance. To create a massive tsunami, you need an immense vertical displacement of water.
Vertical.
You need the ocean floor to suddenly thrust upward or drop downward, displacing billions of gallons of water above it. This typically happens in subduction zones where one tectonic plate is being violently shoved underneath another.
Ah, like a wedge.
Think of shoving a wedge under a rug. The rug bulges upward. When that happens underwater, the ocean lifts, creating a tsunami. But a strike-slip fault like San Andreas is just sliding sideways. It's sliding the textbooks. It doesn't push the ocean floor up. Therefore, the entire climax of the film, the massive wave swallowing San Francisco, is geologically impossible for that specific fault line.
My mind is genuinely blown. So the defining climax of the movie is physically impossible based on the name of the movie itself.
Pretty much.
But wait, if San Andreas can't cause a tsunami and won't swallow cities whole, what is the scientific community actually afraid of? Who is the real big bad wolf in California?
According to the geoscientist writing in Earth Magazine, the much more present, insidious, and dangerous threat to the Bay Area is actually the Hayward Fault.
The Hayward Fault? I feel like I have literally never heard of that in a movie. How can a fault I've never heard of be worse than the legendary San Andreas? Does it produce bigger quakes?
Actually, no. It likely wouldn't produce a quake as massively powerful as the San Andreas could. But the danger of an earthquake isn't just about the magnitude number. It is heavily dependent on geography and human infrastructure.
Right, where it hits matters.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The Hayward Fault is considered far more dangerous because it runs directly beneath some of the most densely populated, heavily urbanized areas in the East Bay cities like Oakland and Berkeley.
So it's a proximity issue.
A massive proximity issue. Think about the infrastructure beneath a modern city. If a magnitude 7.0 earthquake happens on a rural section of the San Andreas, the shaking is severe, but mostly dirt and trees are affected.
Right.
But if a magnitude 7.0 happens on the Hayward Fault, it is rupturing directly underneath millions of people. It is violently shaking complex utility grids, underground high-pressure gas lines, critical water mains, older bridges, major highways, and communication networks.
That sounds disastrous.
The potential for catastrophic fires from broken gas lines, coupled with the inability of emergency services to navigate ruined urban grids, means that a smaller quake on the Hayward Fault has the potential to cause immensely more practical damage and loss of life than a larger quake further away.
So if you're a listener right now, think about the pipes and gas lines under your own street. That's the real danger, not a mythical canyon. But this raises a massive question. If the Hayward Fault is the real, actual ticking time bomb sitting under all this critical infrastructure, why does Hollywood keep obsessing over San Andreas? Why did they spend $110 million on this instead of making a movie called The Hayward Rupture?
It comes down to the intersection of science communication and pop culture marketing. And the blunt answer is the power of brand recognition.
Brand recognition for a fault line.
Absolutely. San Andreas is a globally recognized phrase. Even if you live in London or Tokyo or Buenos Aires and you know nothing about geology, you have likely heard the name San Andreas associated with destruction. It has become a cultural shorthand for the apocalypse.
It's like the Kleenex of earthquakes.
Yes. The name itself sells international tickets. Hayward simply doesn't have that global marquee value. It sounds like a suburban zoning dispute, not a blockbuster film.
It definitely doesn't sound as sexy on a movie poster. But is it just marketing, or is there a narrative reason too?
There is a much deeper psychological narrative reason, and this is where the geoscientists get truly frustrated. The scientific community emphasizes that while a major earthquake on the Hayward Fault would be undeniably horrific, the impact could actually be heavily mitigated.
Mitigated how? You can't stop the Earth from shaking.
No, but you can control how the environment reacts to the shaking. Through human action, aggressive retrofitting of older masonry buildings, strict political enforcement of modern seismic building codes, upgrading water and gas infrastructure to use flexible piping, and comprehensive emergency preparedness measures, we can actually drastically lessen the death toll of a disaster.
So we have some control over our fate.
We have agency, but Hollywood narratives often actively reject that kind of nuance.
Why? Because agency isn't cinematic.
Because Hollywood prefers an unstoppable, unmitigable monster. A mythical megaquake on the San Andreas that splits the earth in two and throws a 300-foot tsunami at a bridge is an act of God. You cannot retrofit an office building to survive the literal earth opening up and swallowing the entire city block.
Right, there's no code for that.
It completely absolves humanity and our local governments of responsibility. It is much easier to sell a thrilling story about a rugged hero surviving an impossible, mythical monster than it is to sell a depressing story about the complex bureaucratic failure of urban planning, underfunded infrastructure, and lax building code enforcement.
Wow. That is a stinging indictment of what we consider entertaining. We actively want to be victims of an unstoppable myth, not victims of our own poor infrastructure planning.
It's human nature.
Because you cannot punch a bad building code, but you can watch Dwayne Johnson fly a helicopter away from a mystical chasm. It is a much more satisfying narrative because it requires no self-reflection.
Exactly. It is the fundamental difference between an exhilarating action movie and a tragic documentary about civic failure.
Okay, so having completely dismantled the scientific accuracy of the film and having poked giant holes in the clunky script and the pacing of the emotional valleys, we have to pivot to the undeniable, cold, hard reality of the situation.
The box office.
Yes. Because regardless of the geologic absurdities, and regardless of the disaster movie-itis, the audiences simply didn't care about the science. This film was a numbers tell a story that completely overrides the scientific critiques.
The financial victory of San Andreas is staggering, and it's especially impressive when you view it in the context of the modern industry. This was an original intellectual property.
Oh, that's right.
It was not based on a comic book, it was not part of a sprawling cinematic universe, and it wasn't based on a pre-existing toy line, it was just a movie about an earthquake.
And it grossed $475 million worldwide. Just let that massive number sink in for a second. Almost $500 million for a movie where a guy drives a motorboat up a vertical wall of water.
It's incredible.
In its opening weekend in North America alone, it grossed $54.5 million. It completely blew past all the industry tracking and financial predictions. And what I find incredibly funny is looking at what else opened that weekend.
What was the competition?
It absolutely crushed the Bradley Cooper film Aloha. It wasn't even a contest. The Rock's bicep flexing against the fault line
Yeah.
absolutely decimated Bradley Cooper's romantic comedy.
Well, the spectacle won out.
Yeah.
And its success was absolutely not limited to domestic audiences in North America. It demonstrated an incredible, undeniable global reach.
Oh, yeah.
It dominated the box office in 60 different countries. If you look at the international numbers, they are fascinating. In Mexico, it grossed $28.4 million, which at the time was the biggest opening for a disaster movie in their history.
Wow.
But the most staggering number, the one that really secured its half-billion-dollar status, came from China.
China absolutely loved this movie.
They devoured it. It grossed $103.2 million in China alone. To put that in perspective,
Yeah.
that is a massive percentage of its total international gross coming from a single territory.
That's huge.
It speaks volumes about how perfectly calibrated the visual language of the film, the pure spectacle of destruction was for an international market that might not care about the nuance of American divorce dialogue, but thoroughly enjoys top-tier CGI destruction.
Right. Explosions translate perfectly.
But perhaps the most surprising and revealing box office story of all comes from South Korea.
Oh, the MERS story.
This
It's wild, and it says so much about human psychology.
Yes. When San Andreas was scheduled to be released in South Korea, the country was in the midst of a significant, highly publicized outbreak of the MERS virus Middle East Respiratory Syndrome.
That was scary stuff.
It was a very serious public health concern, and as a direct result of the fear of contagion, theater admissions across the entire country had absolutely plunged. People were actively avoiding crowded public spaces, which is the logical thing to do during a viral outbreak.
Right. You don't go sit shoulder to shoulder in a dark, enclosed room with a bunch of strangers who might be coughing when there was a respiratory virus going around.
Yeah.
It makes total sense that box office numbers would flatline.
Exactly. The industry expected a total bomb in that territory. And yet, despite the severe health concerns and the massive drop in overall theater attendance, San Andreas still opened to $7.2 million and debuted at #1 at the South Korean box office.
Wait, really think about what that implies.
Yeah.
People were so desperate to see this specific fictional disaster that they were willing to risk exposure to a real-world, actual disaster just to go sit in the theater.
It is a profound testament to the power of escapism. When faced with an invisible, terrifying, and complex real-world threat like a virus, there is immense psychological comfort in watching a highly visible, easily understood, and ultimately survivable cinematic disaster.
So they traded a complex fear for a simple one.
The desire for this specific spectacle overcame a real-world public health crisis.
That is the ultimate definition of a blockbuster. It literally pulled people out of their safe houses during an outbreak. And that success just kept rolling when it hit the home media market, although it ran into a really funny poetic quote.
Oh, the Blu-ray thing?
Yeah. When it was released on digital platforms, DVD and Blu-ray, it sold incredibly well. It easily topped the overall disc sales charts. But, ironically, considering this is a movie that relies entirely on massive, high-definition, bleeding-edge visual effects to sell its spectacle, it was actually blocked from taking the #1 spot on the specific high-definition Blu-ray sales chart.
Blocked by what? What could possibly out-spectacle a $110 million earthquake?
It was blocked by the Diamond Edition release of Disney's 1992 animated classic, Aladdin.
That's amazing.
I just find that so poetically funny. You have this massive, aggressive CGI extravaganza of the California coast sinking into the ocean in high definition, and it gets beaten in Blu-ray sales by a hand-drawn animated genie from the early 90s. It just proves that you cannot predict consumer behavior.
That is a wonderful piece of trivia, and it highlights a fundamental truth about the entertainment market. While massive spectacle certainly sells, deep-rooted nostalgia and family entertainment have an incredibly resilient, quiet power of their own. Sometimes people want to watch the world end, and sometimes they just want to hear Robin Williams sing.
So true. But the studios focus on the $500 million. With that much money in the bank, naturally, Warner Bros. And New Line Cinema immediately wanted a sequel. And the development history of San Andreas 2 is a fascinating story about the logistical bottleneck of modern Hollywood.
It got stuck, right?
Yeah. In 2016, they officially announced a sequel was in active development. The plot was reportedly going to expand the disaster to a global scale, focusing on the Ring of Fire fault lines in the Pacific.
That sounds like a logical next step for the franchise.
They hired writers, director Brad Peyton was set to return, and the main cast, including Johnson, Gugino, Daddario, and even Giamatti, were all expected to come back. The green light was there. But then, absolutely nothing happened. The project stalled completely and entered development hell.
And the reason for that delay tells us everything we need to know about the current state of the movie industry, and specifically the unique, unprecedented position of Dwayne Johnson within it.
What happened?
When Johnson was asked about the delay several years later, he didn't cite script issues or budget concerns. He explained that his production company, $7, operates on a very specific, ruthless principle they call the Moses effect.
The Moses effect. This is such a great concept. Okay, let me use an analogy here because it perfectly mirrors the movie we're talking about.
Go for it.
The Moses effect is essentially the Hollywood logistical equivalent of the literal tsunami we saw in the film. Dwayne Johnson's star power, his daily schedule, and his slate of upcoming projects are so massive, so crowded, that it creates this relentless tidal wave of content.
Right.
For a new project to actually get made and to get inserted into a schedule, it has to be so undeniably important, so culturally and financially crucial to the studio that it literally parts the seas of his existing schedule to take immediate precedence over everything else.
It has to command the waters to part.
Exactly. And San Andreas 2, despite the massive financial success of the first film, simply wasn't a big enough event to part those waters. It wasn't the Moses they needed. So he just got stranded on the sidelines waiting for an opening, while Johnson went off to ride the tidal waves of Jumanji sequels, Fast and Furious spin-offs, and superhero movies.
Your analogy is spot on. It perfectly illustrates how the modern blockbuster ecosystem is deeply fragile. It is entirely bottlenecked by the availability of a very small handful of global megastars.
If you don't have The Rock, you don't have a movie.
You can have a script and a budget, but if you don't have the human shock absorber, the movie doesn't exist. But returning to the massive success of the original film, we have to synthesize exactly why it worked so universally in the first place.
Yeah, why did it resonate so well?
Why did this specific flavor of destruction resonate from Mexico to China to a virus-stricken South Korea? Warner Bros. Distribution chief Dan Feldman made a very astute observation at the time. He noted that audiences simply do not tire of fresh disaster films.
They just love disaster.
He traced the cinematic lineage all the way back to the Poseidon Adventure in 1972. The human appetite for watching large-scale destruction from a safe distance is a constant. What audiences get tired of, he argued, is watching sequels of the exact same disaster. They want a new flavor of destruction, not just Earthquake Part 2.
Which is deeply ironic, considering their immediate studio impulse was to try and develop San Andreas 2.
True, the corporate impulse is always to replicate a financial success, but the core appeal of the first film was its standalone nature. You didn't need to do any homework to enjoy it. And this brings us to what I believe is the most insightful analysis of the film's success, which comes from Salon critic Andrew O'Hare here.
What was his take?
He pointed out that San Andreas acts as a very specific, very powerful form of counter-narrative in our current, highly fractured cultural climate. He called it an apolitical apocalypse.
An apolitical apocalypse. That is a heavy term. Break that down for me. How can the end of the world not be political?
Think about the underlying themes of most modern disaster narratives over the last 20 years. If it is a climate change movie like The Day After Tomorrow or 2012, there is an inherent political message about environmental policy, carbon emissions, and governmental negligence.
Right.
If it is an alien invasion movie or a zombie outbreak, there are almost always heavy subtexts about colonialism, military overreach, or border control. Even the massive superhero movies usually have complex political allegories woven into their destruction regarding surveillance or weapons manufacturing. The audience is constantly being asked to interpret a message.
They are being preached to while things blow up.
Exactly. But an earthquake, a massive tectonic plate shifting deep beneath the Earth's crust, it has absolutely no political agenda.
Not at all.
It is not taking a side in a cultural war. It is not asking the audience to examine their personal carbon footprint or debate foreign policy. It is simply the ground shaking. It is a pure, primal, unifying fear.
Wow.
Everyone, regardless of their nationality, their native language, or their political affiliation, instinctively understands the terror of the solid Earth suddenly opening up. That apolitical purity means the film translates perfectly across all cultures without needing any complex thematic translation or localization. It speaks the universal language of survival.
That is a brilliant observation. It is essentially a blank slate of disaster. Because there is no complex political message, you just project your own basic human survival instincts onto the screen, grab your popcorn, and enjoy the ride. It really explains why it was such a global juggernaut, playing just as well in Beijing as it did in Los Angeles.
It is the ultimate democratizing force, cinematically speaking. The earthquake does not care who you voted for or what your stance on carbon taxes is, and therefore anyone can sit in the theater and enjoy watching it.
Well, this has been an incredibly fun, eye-opening journey. We have really unpacked the tectonic plates of this movie to see what makes it work. Let's briefly recap the ground we've covered on this deep dive.
Sounds good.
We started by exploring the structural shift in disaster movie DNA, moving away from the bloated, cameo-filled 1970s ensemble casts to relying on the solo heavy lifting of a single megastar. We look at how Dwayne Johnson acted as our human shock absorber, providing a psychological anchor amidst the chaos.
We covered a lot of ground.
We really did. We analyzed the clunky pacing of disaster movie-itis, recognizing that awkward divorce drama amidst a collapsing city functions exactly like the slow chain pulling a roller coaster up a hill to prevent sensory fatigue.
We also took a hard, critical look at the spectacular absurdity of the CGI, dodging container ships in a tsunami, and how the obvious unreality of it all acts as a psychological comfort blanket for the audience.
Yeah, that comfort blanket is key.
And then we dove into the actual science, debunking the myth of the apocalyptic San Andreas Fault in favor of the much more realistic, heavily urbanized threat of the Hayward Fault. We discussed why Hollywood prefers unmitigable monsters over problems that require civic engineering and better building codes.
We covered so much ground. And finally, we mapped out the film's undeniable, world-conquering box office dominance, analyzing how its brand of apolitical primal fear resonated globally. We looked at how it even pulled people into theaters during a public health crisis in South Korea, only for its sequel to eventually run headfirst into the scheduling realities of Dwayne Johnson's Moses Effect. It is a fascinating, comprehensive snapshot of what global popcorn entertainment looked like in 2015.
It truly is a remarkable piece of pop culture archaeology. And as we wrap up, I want to leave you, the listener, with one final, perhaps provocative thought to chew on.
Oh, lay it on us.
Think about the very ending of this film. The city of San Francisco is in absolute smoldering ruins. The entire peninsula has been turned into an island. The infrastructure is gone. Thousands, possibly millions, are dead.
It's a bleak scene.
Yet, amidst all this unimaginable devastation, an enormous American flag dramatically unfurls over the skeletal remains of the Golden Gate Bridge. And the core family, Ray, Emma, and Blake, look out over the apocalyptic destruction, holding each other, totally reconciled, and looking oddly, deeply hopeful.
They look like they just won the lottery, not survived an apocalypse.
Exactly. Which begs a deeper, slightly uncomfortable question about our own psychology. When you buy a ticket to watch a disaster movie, are you really showing up just to watch the terrifying destruction of society? Or are you secretly showing up for the fantasy of having your slate wiped completely clean? Is the secret, unspoken appeal of the disaster genre the subconscious desire for an event so massive that it forces you to stop worrying about your mundane divorce papers, your dead-end job, your mortgage, and your daily anxieties?
Wow.
Does the apocalypse offer the ultimate, terrible permission to finally simply rebuild your life from the ground up?
That is quite the thought to end on. The apocalypse not as an ending, but as the ultimate violent fresh start, the ultimate clean, still pool before the shaking begins. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you enjoyed the ride, and we encourage you to keep questioning the spectacle, the pacing, and the science next time the ground shakes or the theater bass thrums at your local multiplex.